Hello and welcome to Conversations on Conversations, where we explore topics to help us have more powerful conversations with ourselves and others. I'm your host, my friends, Sarah Noll Wilson, and joining me today is such a special guest, Rob Craven Jr., where we are going to be talking about legacy leadership in a way that might blow your mind. And I'm so excited. I've had the privilege of working with him and cannot wait for you to hear this conversation. So a little bit about Rob. Rob Craven Jr. was born and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and the surrounding suburbs. A graduate of Episcopal Academy, he earned a bachelor's degree from Syracuse University's School of Management in 1973. Rob joined the family business, F.A. Davis Company, working part-time before college, and after graduating, he became a full-time college textbook representative, later promoted to national sales manager, and in 1981, he took on the role of editor-in-chief and COO, and then in 1989, he was named president. And under his leadership, the company's annual sales grew from $3 million to $50 million. Outside of the publishing industry, Rob has been an active parent, coaching his children's sports and serving as treasurer for 13 years on the board of trustees at the Russell Byers Charter School. He and his wife, Michelle, have been married for 43 years and have 3 children and 4 grandchildren. Rob, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Good to see you, Sarah.
It's good to see you again. I always ask this question to get us started, and you can answer however you want. What else do you want us to know about you?
I guess I want you to know that I'm enjoying what I'm doing. You know, I have 3 children in the business. I feel fortunate every day I wake up, you know, that they're in the business, you know, that we do have succession lined up, and I want them to know how much I've enjoyed, you know, my 51 years full time at F.A. Davis.
What a gloriously inspiring start to this conversation of like, I'm just loving what I'm doing, you know, and one of the ways, so for our audience, just so you know how Rob and I got connected, we've been fortunate to do some development work and had the privilege of meeting Rob over the summer during some work and had a chance meeting in the hallway. And there was something, and okay, now, and you're going to have to correct me. So how many years has the company been around, and how many leaders, how many presidents have there been? And folks, I want you to listen very clearly to this answer because it's astounding to me.
We have been operating as medical publishers and health science textbook publishers for 145 years. And that span includes 4 presidents, all in the family. There were some issues. There was a bankruptcy in 1900, and there was an interim president for a short period of time there. And then in 1979, there was an interim president who really never got out of probation. But essentially, 4 presidents have run the company for 145 years.
That is unbelievable. And so, you know, people who are listening, you understand now why I was so eager to get Rob to come on the show, because one, to have a company legacy that's lasted like nearly 150 years. I mean, not many companies have that sustainability and legacy, but then to have the leadership. And the thing that inspired me, and also another reason why I wanted you to come on the show, well, lots of reasons, but one is I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the history, particularly about your Aunt Irene, which people will understand here in a minute why we're being really specific about his Aunt Irene, but also the fact that how you think about leadership is very human focused in a way that I don't always see people with your tenured in this position. So, you know, I mean, we could do a whole podcast just on your Aunt Irene, but so take us back and give us, you know, a brief history of F.A. Davis, the starting, and where we, you know, and let's talk about Aunt Irene because she's fascinating to me.
Yes. F.A. Davis was actually working for a British publisher in the United States who was a medical publisher and was selling and also recruiting authorship. And when he was in Philadelphia, which is really the center of medical publishing early on, he ended up running into Dr. John Shoemaker at the University of Pennsylvania's School of Graduate Medicine, who actually was a dermatologist and was eager to have a manuscript published. And so, the short story is that was F.A. Davis's first publication, and it started in Philadelphia. And he lost his first wife. He did have one son. He met my Aunt Irene Craven, Aunt Irene Craven, in that area, and married her in 1895. She was 20, he was 45, and that's the generational trick for having four presidents over a 145-year period. You have a widow who succeeds her husband at age 42 and runs the company for the next 43 years. So in effect, husband and wife ran F.A. Davis for the first 80 years of its existence. There were some interesting things that happened within the family. Aunt Irene was the oldest of 10 siblings. My grandfather, my father's father, was the youngest of those 10. And he died when my father was 10 months old. He had my father had one brother, and my grandmother could afford really one son. Two sons was asking a lot, and Aunt Irene invited to raise Bobby. And at age 5, he moved to Crumlin, Pennsylvania, and she groomed him to take over the business. And meanwhile, she was running the F.A. Davis Company, which she started, before women's suffrage, and got through Depression. I think one of her, key survival instincts was really not to trust anybody, because she sensed that everybody was trying to take advantage of the fact that how could a woman actually succeed at what she's doing. And so she kept a sharp eye, and she knew who not to trust. And that was just short of everybody.
I mean, can we just pause for a second? And again, what was the year when she took over? So F.A.
1917.
Davis. So 1917, in a time when women had literally no rights. She was like, nope, I'm going to run this company and I'm going to do this. And what I loved about reading some of the stories that were written about her was hearing about how different people who maybe supported or consultant were like, well, I want to be a part of it. And she was like, you're going to come in and try to take it over, and we're not going to do that. And here's what I can't, you cannot hear about her story without thinking there is an incredible amount of chutzpah that she has. And I'm curious how has that shaped the company? And how has that shaped you as being the, next, the most current generation leading this organization that, quite frankly, was founded on a sort of an act of rebellion against the system?
Well, that can be answered on a number of different fronts. Personally, I got to know her. She died when I was 12. And my father would take my brother and sister and I over for Sunday visits, at least once a month. And she doted over us she couldn't wait to see us again. And I always felt that love. And then as I got to hear my father's story when I got a little bit older, and they didn't get along at all. Yeah,
they had a very different relationship.
Yeah, she was a sharp disciplinarian. And really tried to completely control his life. First date, she's in the back seat. He ended up, when he married my mother, they had to elope, and he just had to tell her, I'm taking the car. She didn't want him to go into the service. World War II broke out. He was drafted in 1942, and he was in school at the time. He was at Drexel, and he got a deferment for a year. But he ended up enlisting, so that he said he wanted to avoid the Army. He wanted to go into the Navy, and she didn't want him to go into the military. She was very distraught with him on many levels. But getting back to my visits with her, he finally told me, he said, it was great to see that she could express her love for me through you and through your brother and through your sister, but she could never do that directly to me.
Yeah. Which on some level, right, makes sense when, she forged the path she could. One of my favorite stories. So I'm referencing the book From the Top of the Stairs, and written by your father, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And the story of like him being gone on his military work, not telling her that he's coming back. He shows up at the front door after some period of time, and she just goes, "You're late.
You're late for dinner. You're late for dinner."
I love that. I love that so much. And then when being primed to be the next leader, the consultant that they brought in was basically like, here's the deal. You're going to get this business, but you basically just have to comply and agree with everything she says at this point, which is just, it's I'm sure wasn't easy for him, but there is something really inspiring for me to hear in that. One of the things that struck me, Rob, when you and I were having conversations was how important it is to you to honor her legacy. Obviously there's the legacy of F.A. Davis, who started it. But when we had the conversation, there was so much respect and just wanting to make sure her story was heard, which I found so, again, like just inspiring to talk about, to say, this is a really important thing for folks to understand and know.
Yeah. And I think, there's sort of the oddity of her really wanting her nephew to succeed her. Yeah. But then, she didn't even have a will when she was 80 years old. Mm. And to have a peer of his who ended up becoming a lawyer, a good friend for since high school, who ended up on the board of directors, who volunteered to take Mrs. Davis aside and say, nobody's lending us any money because we have an 80-year-old president. Why don't you do something and promote your nephew? And so she did. And then it became time to put the will together. And he asked her what she wanted. He said, well, I just want the company to go on in the name of my beloved husband. Mm. And, and that's what we live by.
Yeah. There's a sacredness to that. I wonder what does that feel like for you to know that you are protecting that legacy in a time where, quite frankly, things are so fast and changing and buyouts are happening, and the companies don't last. We know that the lifespan of a company is so short. So what does that mean for you to be the bearer of that legacy now, while simultaneously honoring it, but making sure it sustains and moving it into the future?
Well, it is, as you coined before, it is the core of the legacy leadership, really, that has become my style, because I grew to learn exactly how powerful it is to tell the story. And really, it's when I think about, my leadership style, and what I learned from my father, he was not the micromanager. he was the raconteur that loved to tell a story. And so he taught me the power of telling these stories and to enrich the legacy. Mm. And, and especially with Aunt Reen, I mean, F.A. Davis is about 2/3 women. Mm-hmm. And so, the story of Aunt Irene is alive.
Yeah.
I mean, her portrait has been in, the main meeting room, forever. And we're renovating the building right now. And we wanted, and even though we're a virtual company, we can set aside an area for a bigger meeting room, and I can, become kind of an archivist and tell the F.A. Davis story in a space, that used to be customer service and accounting.
Yeah. Okay. So in total transparency, my dog is sitting by my feet right now and she is snoring very loudly. So if you hear unusual noises, it's coming from Sally. But, so one of the things that I'm curious about is you have been with this company 51 years. You have been in a variety of leadership roles. You have led the helm for a number of decades. How would you, and I want to, I want to get really clear about how I ask this. How would you distill your leadership values? And what I want to push you on is, I don't want to hear what you think I want to hear. I don't want you to say what, and I know you won't, but sometimes, because I've witnessed your leadership, I've seen it, I've seen the impact and the ripple effect of it. But I'm curious to hear in your words, what are your values as a leader? What is the impact that you hope to make? What's your true north, right? However you want to think about it.
I don't want to sound like a cliche, but, it may come off as a cliche, but I want the organization and the people in it to know that we care about them. We truly care about everything about them, their private lives, their involvement, their urge to become better at what they're doing. I mean, the company can do and survive, in a world of big corporate environments and companies like us that have been bought up. But it's really the glue that keeps us together, is that, that number one, we can create a culture of a caring culture. I'm really kind of nervous about, what we can do virtually. And part of this renovation is, to create a meeting place where somebody will get off, next week's, departmental meeting and say, let's meet in Philadelphia. Let's do it, person to person. But yeah, it's meant to be a caring atmosphere. And once I think people, I can see it. I can see how people respond to being cared for. And they want to do better. They want to do better. They love the legacy that we're trying to sustain, and it resonates with them, and that makes people want to do better at what they do and contribute that way.
Yeah. I fundamentally believe that care can be a competitive advantage. And it's not something and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. What I've witnessed in my work and thinking about and observing and working with leaders and being passionate about this dynamic is that if you don't care for your people, I don't think you should be leading them, because the consequences can be so significant. And, and I heard so many stories, whether it was how the company or you supported somebody, how it looked like to create flexibility for a really good employee, even the decision to say, we figured out virtual, this benefits our people, let's do this. One of the things I'm curious about, what are the traps that you think people in leadership positions fall into that get in their way or create barriers, right, to the success of a company? Because again, you have had the opportunity of supporting, mentoring, you've had your own lived experiences. What are some of those pitfalls that you see folks fall into?
Well, I think probably the biggest one is like there's kind of a reflex when you can see that a direct report needs help, either, and maybe the training didn't work or whatever the issue is, that there's a tendency to micromanage, and I know that covers a lot of territory, micromanaging, but it is a good way to, and one of your favorite themes, reflect on exactly how you're coming off. Is your direct report, listening to what you were saying, because you're just imposing what they need to do, and that's all you're worried about. And so that becomes a trap, not to violate sort of the boundaries of letting people, discover for themselves, go through their own lumps. Because I can see how my father did it, and I was kind of resentful at the very beginning. He said, "Why isn't he telling me what to do?"
Sure.
Well, because he wanted me to fall down and get up again. And even there was a vice president for a while who I reported to, and and he was a very difficult individual to get along with, and he was a CFO, and he didn't really understand sales and all that kind of stuff. But it wasn't until I went out as a sales manager and I said some of the seasoned reps and said, "Listen, we know about your father and Aunt Irene. All he's doing is trying to simulate what he went through by giving this guy life in the company. So he's grooming you this way." And that was one of those moments, one of those enlightening moments that I think that you like to talk about.
I have to repeat something you said, because I don't know that I've ever heard it said so articulately. Well, there's two things. Getting too focused on imposing what you think they should do. Like, even just the language of imposing feels suffocating, but so beautifully stated is, how do you not violate the boundaries of people finding their own way and experiencing their own bumps? That I sit there and go, man, what would be possible if more people understood that? Or what would that look like? And I know, and well enough that it's not like you step into this role and you suddenly had everything figured out. What was one of the hardest leadership lessons you had to learn?
Well, it took me a while to get comfortable speaking in front of a group, number one. But then part of the difficulty was trying to get my arms around the two different relationships with the same person. And that, there's a one-on-one relationship, and then there's a relationship you have with people when you're in a group, and you realize, that when you speak to them in a group, you can't do it the same way that you're doing one-on-one, because you have to do it. Depending on what the topic is and what the moment in that conversation is, but I think that was difficult. That was difficult for me, and then just sort of get comfortable in a group, knowing full well that this is an entirely different person. This is a body of 25 people. This isn't 25 individuals. This is really 25 people together, and you have to talk to them as somebody completely different.
That's such a good reframe and a perspective. And for some people, they struggle with the opposite. They can be in front of a group, but they don't know how to show up one-on-one with curiosity, vulnerability, right? Candor.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and you can feel free to answer this however you want. One of the things that is fascinating to me, and is a unique challenge so what I've observed in working with family legacy companies is there's a different type. Let me rephrase this. There can be a different type of pressure when you are stepping into the role that a parent played or a close family member played, And especially challenging if that person was beloved, right? Like sometimes people are ready for the change, but usually if somebody's been leading the organization for a real long time, there is sort of a beloved nature. What was that transition like for you? And so I'm going to ask it in two parts. So let's start there. What was that transition like for you to find your own voice, to step into your power, again, while honoring legacy, but also being able to bring your unique gifts to the table that might have been different than your dad's?
Yeah. Well, I think, I think it was certainly an advantage, that I got to work in the company for 10 years before I was reporting to my father, that I had to learn, to build a relationship, with the manager, who I was reporting to, and I had to be sensitive to the fact that, that they were managing, the owner's son.
Yeah. Were you aware of that? Were you aware of that when you were younger?
Yeah. I mean, I think I really was. I mean, because they were anxious times. I mean, it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't easy. I mean, and you have a whole industry coming by and thinking, well, this guy's on easy street, and and it's not, because there's expectations, there's sort of watchful eyes, there's the gossip hounds that, that want to snap judgment on whatever you just said, and run it down the hall. I mean, there's all of those kinds of things that you start to become aware of. And, but I got straight into sales, and, when you're fairly isolated, my father said, Aunt Reen, never let me go out with salesmen. She didn't like the way of them. They womanize and they drink too much, and you're not going to be one of them. And so but then he had to manage them, and he wasn't allowed to go out and work with them. And so he ended up working, like moonlighting for Encyclopedia Britannica and going door to door and seeing what it was like to sell. And these were these were commissioned salespeople that he had to manage. And so that's what he did. And so when he
went off and sold at night, and
so that he could know what it takes to sell, or what it feels like to be in that role. And so so now I'm getting out of college, and he's saying, well, what you're going to do? I mean, this was really one of the few things that he said, this is an absolute. This is one thing you have to do. And you have to go out into the field and talk to the customers and learn that way. I had to do it very indirectly. and I'm saying this is the most important way for you to start, is to learn the customers. And he was right. He was absolutely right. And so I kind of got to build my own sort of self-equity, out in the field. And so, with people that had no idea who I was, they had no idea that I was the son of the president. And I didn't have all of that sort of ringing around. So I was really with the company for 3.5 years before I came into the home office and sort of had to deal with home office politics. And so that gave me quite a bit of momentum. So there was a little bit of advantage to that too. And just sort of getting your feet down and understanding your role as the son of the boss, the SOB.
I love this story. This speaks so much to him and his value. And because how easy could it have been for him or anyone, right? To go, I mean, I'm the founders, or, I'm the president's kid. Like, I'm going to be, I love that. He's like, I need to understand this. So I'm actually going to sell some other books on the side under the dark of the night. I mean, I'm just imagining him sneaking out and Anna Reen being like, hey, where are you headed? Like, oh, I'm just, going to go for a walk and knocking on doors. I mean, I'm probably over dramatizing it, but what an what an amazing example of him understanding that in order for me to support them, I need to understand them. And for me to lead the company, I need to understand the customers. And I'm so tickled by this story, Rob. Like, it's going to be one that I share in some kind of future presentation, because I just, that's not something that you see often, or you see enough, right? Of people going, oh, I really need to understand them, and I need to understand the customers too.
Yeah. You know, and I can't ignore the fact that, you know, because my father and Aunt Reen didn't get along, you know, he was constantly trying to think about ways to do it better, you know, than she's doing it, because, you know, because everything for her is just, you know, autocratically, you know, absolute.
Yeah. And like, and that was learned at such a young age. I mean, this is, you know, he was, right, lived with her at age, so from like 5 on, like a lifetime of shaping.
Right.
So as you think, okay, so knowing that you have your 3 children working for the company in different ways, and knowing that there will be a transition at some point, how has your experience then shaped how you think about setting them up for success, setting other leaders up for success, who are gonna, you know, eventually at some point take on the next chapter of the company?
Well, first,
because I know you're thinking about it. Like, I know how intentional you are.
I tell them not to look at the drama series Succession, not even for one episode. But I think, you know, and it happened fairly organically, that they are in 3 different sides of the business. Mm-hmm. You know, the Robbie came through sales and sales management, and now he's a director of sales and marketing. And Matthew came through information systems, and he's a great problem solver. And now, you know, he's running all the developers of our digital content, you know, that we're selling. And Haley, who also came in through sales, you know, is now an acquisitions editor, you know, which now used to mean acquiring, you know, rights for, you know, instructors that are writing books, you know, and now it means, you know, just working with the authors in new editions, because now it's all about value added and trying to figure out what next edition needs what digital component and what's it, you know, really going to make it so that it's sticky. It's like you say, and they want to renew it over and over again. So they're in 3 distinct corners of the business right now, you know, which really is very fortunate. And you know, and we have, you know, a very dynamic vice president and who actually, you know, is the great demonstrator of how virtual publishing can work, as he lives in England. Mm-hmm. You know, he is Dutch by birth, you know, and got into publishing from a big corporate publisher that came, that shipped him to the United States, and he fell in love with the United States. Now he's back in London, but anyway, but he is at you know, he's the in-between leadership with the company. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and Robbie reports to him, and Matt and Haley do not, but Menno is the most active in terms of the day-to-day part of the business.
Yeah. I can only imagine the amount of pride you must feel. You know, I think about something my father-in-law, who I'm very close with, said, we just want you to be contributing members of society. like that's success as a parent, is like, are you positively contributing members of society? And I know the pride I feel in my company as it grows. I know the pride I feel in my colleagues, seeing them step and grow. And I can only imagine, as a parent then, being able to witness that, not just for your kids, but also just as a leader, seeing the company grow, seeing the you know, the workers that have come on, the workers that continue to stay. What is that like for you to, you know, to look at it from the this angle, from this time of your life, to look back at all that has been accomplished?
I mean, it's extremely rewarding. I mean, I think when I ran into you last July, and we hadn't met yet, and so you were trying to figure out who you were talking to. All you wanted was feedback for what happened this morning. And you asked me how long I'd been at F.A. Davis, and I said, well, they just honored me for 50 years last year. and you said, oh, well, then you must be the owner. And so then,
so I did a terrible job of research because I just work with Juliet so much.
But we have, it is, a remarkable kind of survival of so many, different, forks of the road, challenges, ages where, are we going to get out of this? I mean, I think, back in the late 90s, when .com was going crazy, and before the .com crash, I mean, the level of student that was getting into the health sciences was definitely deteriorating. Everybody was going for easy money. And I mean, I had two, of my upper management folks, who had been with me for quite a while. I mean, separately come into my office and say, do you really think that we can get through this? And, and that was one of those moments where I realized, if I really got candid with them, I wasn't going to do them any favors, and they wouldn't have felt any better. And, and it was a leadership lesson, to realize, that sometimes, that you don't, the outcome could be either way.
Yeah.
And so you need to dwell on the positive. You need to dwell on how we're going to get to the more favorable end. You have to do that. Now, some might say, well, that's not really being that candid. So no, you're just talking about, you're dwelling on the reality of success. This is what success is going to look like. And you have to say, yeah, we can make it because of this, this, and this. And in your heart of hearts, that some things could have gone wrong. But you're not doing the organization any favors by being candid at that moment. So when I think about, the pride I have in the organization and everybody in it, I think about, there were several periods of time that lasted 1 or 2 or 3 years. Yeah. And in some cases we were the .com crash did as much for health science publishing than anything, because higher quality people got back into health sciences because they had nowhere else to go. Yeah. And so, and that translates. I mean, we all talk about how students don't like to read books anymore, and they don't. But you have a better student. They're more likely to read books. They're more likely to buy books. They're more likely not to ignore the books in the bookstore that the instructor said, you'll need this for this class. And so we ended up, we had a real spike. All the publishers, all the boats rose in like 2001, 2002. And that saved us. So these like conditions that are completely out of our control, that end up, when you reflect on them and you go, what would we have been if that hadn't happened? And, and so there are a number of those over the 145 years. And, and my father's done well to help us remember many of them. And I have a few of my own.
I so appreciate that. I appreciate hearing that as a fairly young, new business owner. And because it can be so easy to forget that there's going to be peaks and valleys. And to your point, one of the things I was thinking of when you talked about, how do we sort of stay connected to the possibilities? There's a possibility this will fail. There's also a possibility this can succeed. So how do we, to dwell on that, which I think your language there is very intentional. Like, let's just dwell on that for a second. One of my favorite leadership authors, Marty Linsky, he was a former Harvard professor, and we were having a conversation once. And one of the things he shared that has always stuck with me is that you have to balance the reality, like the brutal reality, with relentless optimism. Like it's a both and.
Yeah.
And so I love hearing that. And I think it's such a valuable reminder. And it's interesting because you actually answered a question that I was going to ask you, which is, as you look at just the increasing uncertainty in the world and how quickly things are changing, and the role technology is playing in our world. What do leaders need to be thinking about? And so on some level, you've already answered it, but I'm just curious, for people who are listening, who are maybe new in leadership, maybe they're, in their middle of their career, as you look at the transition we're in, what would be one thing, like what would be one piece of advice or a mantra or a stay focused on this that you think would be really important for us to hold on to?
Well, I think, it's the essence, Sarah, of what you're helping us with is to forge better relationships with everybody around you. And, and it doesn't have to be direct report, boss to underling or anything like that. It's everybody that you come in contact with. You need to make the best relationship that you can with everybody. And so, and if you go in, with that intent, however, like aware at any given moment, there's sort of the subconscious and the conscious. I mean, if you can sort of try to spread goodwill, here, there, and everywhere, it definitely compounds itself. It will. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen, because it's the only way to really engender, a feeling of trust within the organization. And that, and that's just, we haven't used the word trust, but that's what we've been talking about, in terms of making relationships better and having people more forthcoming with what they're thinking, because, they trust who's listening.
That language of how do they trust who's listening? That's a real gift. Rob, this has been an absolute treat and exactly what I was hoping it was going to be and more. And I'm so excited. Now, as we wrap up our time, since it's the first time you've been on the show, the question I ask all of our first-time guests, because, the whole intent of this is just how do we think differently about the conversations we have with ourselves and others. So what was a conversation, Rob, that you either had with yourself or that you had with someone else that was transformative for you?
Well, there's a few of them. But I can say, and just in talking about, I guess I'd rather dwell on sort of the value of storytelling, because it really is the essence of what my father engendered in me, and the power of storytelling. And I wish someday that I could tell a story as well as he could, but I think I can write as well. I'm not sure if I can speak it as well, but the power of telling the stories is to also tell people how much you care about them, with really the attention that you put into the story. When it really resonates with them, if you articulate it just right, it has a caring and trusting kind of build to it, that makes storytelling so powerful. And so I think, and I was very fortunate that I got 3 years with my father from age 98 to 100. After we lost my stepmother, and so I really had him to myself after that. And and I would go over and visit, and he was still so lucid, and I could send him down a rabbit hole here and there, and he'd tell me another story, and I thought I'd heard all of them, and if I could just cue him one way or another, all of a sudden I'd be hearing something I'd never heard before. But I mean, it's the power of that, and I took notes. I mean, I've got a file. I can't wait to tell the history of the company. I can't wait to tell in the new renovation that we have, I have so many decisions to make on how many different threads that we have. And, if we put a timeline on this big 2-story wall, what's the thread going to be? Is it going to be the publishing piece? Is it going to be a people piece? Is it going to be a family piece? I mean, there's so many different ways to go with it. And so, and we do have archives of books, that go back all the way. And so many of those will be on display. But anyway, I guess it's the power of storytelling and taking the time to tell a good story, because, people are so short, with, oh yeah, there he goes again. There he's going off again, telling them. But if it's the right place and the right time, and you've got, a listening audience, you can build a level of trust, that will be better when that story's over.
Beautiful. That feels like such a gorgeous place for us to wrap up our conversation. Rob Craven Jr., thank you so much for saying yes to me in the hallway. And when I was bouncing out and leaving and you were coming into the club, I know it took us a bit to get this scheduled, but I really appreciate having you on the show. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. It was great to be here.
Our guest this week has been Rob Craven Jr. And I don't know about you all, but there were a number of phrases and the ways that he described things that just I want to frame. The one that's sticking with me right now is, how do we trust who is listening to us? And boy, you can understand why that is sticky to my heart. And as always, my friends, we want to hear from you. What resonated for you? What came up? What are you curious about? Send me an email at podcast@sarahnollwilson.com. Again, podcast@sarahnollwilson.com, where I read and respond to all the messages we receive. If you liked what you heard or have been listening for a while, please consider supporting the show. There's 2 ways you can do it that are incredibly meaningful for us. The first is to rate, review, and subscribe to the show on your preferred podcast platform. This helps us to be able to increase our exposure so we can continue to have powerful conversations like the one we did today. Also, if you want to support the team that makes this show possible, consider becoming a patron. You can go to patreon.com/conversations on conversations, where your financial support, no matter how big or small, goes to support the team that makes this show possible. Also, you get early episodes that are ad-free, and you get some limited edition swag. So that's a win-win-win. Speaking of the team that makes this show possible, a big shout out to our producer, Nick Wilson, our sound editor, Drew Noll, and the rest of the Snowco crew. And just a big final thank you to Rob Craven Jr. for bringing his heart, bringing his humanity, and bringing his stories. Well, my friends, that concludes this episode of Conversations on Conversations. And remember, when we can change the conversations we have with ourselves and others, we can change the world. So, till next time, please be sure to rest, rehydrate, and I'll see you again so very soon.